Hello and welcome, Minnesota Farah. We are genuinely very happy to have you with us for our daily coverage of the NFL news. Please subscribe to our channel to support our initiative as we bring to you the latest updates from the world of NFL on a daily basis. Now let's dive deep into our news stories.
It's that time of the week again where we dive headfirst into the NFL Week 6 Power Rankings, taking a close look at all 32 teams and their performances. I'm your host, and I'll be your guide through this thrilling journey. So, let's not waste any more time and jump right into the action. 1. San Francisco 49ers. Kicking things off, we have the San Francisco 49ers holding on to the top spot. Brock Purdy is lighting it up with an incredible 9 touchdowns and a big fat 0 in the interception column. The Niners are averaging a jaw-dropping 33 points per game. It's no wonder they're finally getting some legitimate MVP love. Now, let's move on to our next update. 2. Philadelphia Eagles. The Philadelphia Eagles are flying high at the second spot. Jalen Carter has been a beast, tied with none other than Aaron Donald for the most QB pressures in the NFL, a staggering 23 in just 5 weeks. That's some elite company right there. Now, let's move on to our next update. 3. Miami Dolphins. The Miami Dolphins have made a splash at number 3. They've been racking up an astonishing 2,568 yards and offense through just 5 games. To put that into perspective, that's the most in NFL history. However, it's not all sunshine in Miami, as they're dealing with a significant knee injury to RB Dev on a chain that could potentially land him on IR. Now, let's move on to our next update. 4. Detroit Lions. Next up, we have the Detroit Lions. At 4-1, they're proving that they're no longer just the lovable underdogs. They'll be looking even scarier once they get Jahmyr Gibbs and Amon-Ra St. Brown back into the mix. But be prepared for some challenging matchups ahead with road games against Tampa Bay and Baltimore. Now, let's move on to our next update. 5. Kansas City Chiefs. The Kansas City Chiefs are holding steady at the 5th spot. It might not feel like they've hit their stride just yet, but they're 4-1, and that speaks volumes. Keep an eye on Travis Kelce's injury status as the week progresses. He's a game changer. Now, let's move on to our next update. 6. Seattle Seahawks. Heading to the 6th spot, we've got the Seattle Seahawks. This weekend, they're in for a low-key fun matchup against Cincinnati. The question on everyone's mind is, can the Bengals keep their streak going, or will the Seahawks improve to 4-1? Now, let's move on to our next update. 7. Buffalo Bills. The Buffalo Bills have taken a bit of a tumble in the rankings, dropping 5 spots to number 7. But the real concern here is the growing list of injuries. A week after Tre'Davious White's season-ending injury, they've now lost top LB Matt Milano and starting tackle Daquan Jones indefinitely. Now, let's move on to our next update. 8. Tampa Bay Buccaneers. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers are sitting at the 8th spot, and they've got 3 critical weeks ahead. These matchups will truly reveal who the Bucs are, with games against Detroit, Atlanta, and a challenging road game against Buffalo. Now, let's move on to our next update. 9. Jacksonville Jaguars. The Jacksonville Jaguars have been a bit of an enigma this season, but that changed last weekend. Their surprising victory over Buffalo has turned some heads. Most notably, Trevor Lawrence had his first game with over 300 passing yards, showcasing his potential. Now, let's move on to our next update. 10. Baltimore Ravens. Mark Andrews and the Baltimore Ravens know they need to wake up. A game they should have won slipped through their fingers last Sunday against Pittsburgh. Now, let's move on to our next update. 11. New Orleans Saints. The New Orleans Saints have surged up the rankings. Alvin Kamara is back in top form, with 25 touches leading to a dominant 34-0 win over New England. Now, let's move on to our next update. 12. Los Angeles Chargers. Watch out for the Los Angeles Chargers as they aim to sink Dallas' season. They'll be welcoming back RB Austin Eckler, which is a game changer. Now, let's move on to our next update. 13. Atlanta Falcons. The Atlanta Falcons have made a remarkable leap in the rankings, moving up 8 spots. Desmond Ridder has been a revelation, going 5-0 at home as a starter. Now, let's move on to our next update. 14. Cleveland Browns. Cleveland is facing a crucial 3-game stretch against the 49ers, Colts, and Seahawks. These matchups will reveal whether they have the staying power to contend. Now, let's move on to our next update. 15. Pittsburgh Steelers. The Pittsburgh Steelers might not be favorites to win it all, but Sunday's victory over Baltimore shows they can compete with the best. If there's one thing we know, it's that Mike Tomlin's teams are always in the mix. Now, let's move on to our next update. 16. Indianapolis Colts. The Indianapolis Colts snapped a 5-game losing streak to Mike Vrabel's Titans, but the question remains, how big of a loss is the absence of Anthony Richardson going to be? Now, let's move on to our next update. 17. Dallas Cowboys. National outlets may still have respect for the Cowboys, but our ranking here is not as generous. Dak Prescott's struggles with 5 touchdowns and 4 interceptions are concerning, and with massive dead cap numbers, Jerry Jones has a tough road ahead. Now, let's move on to our next update. 18. Houston Texans. It was a tough loss for the Houston Texans on Sunday, but the next two matchups against the Saints and the winless Panthers could provide some much-needed relief. Now, let's move on to our next update. 19. Cincinnati Bengals. Cincinnati Bengals are making believers out of people. A friend of mine even placed a bet on them to win the division at plus 600 odds. Can they pull it off? Well, I certainly think they have a shot. Now, let's move on to our next update. 20. Los Angeles Rams. The Los Angeles Rams put up a valiant effort last Sunday against the Eagles, even though they ultimately squandered several opportunities in the second half. It was a positive sight to see Cooper Kupp back in action, and alongside rookie sensation Puka Nacua, they've got a bright future. Now, let's move on to our next update. 21. Washington Commanders. Gut check time for Ron Rivera and the Washington Commanders. They're traveling to Atlanta, hoping to break a 3-game losing streak and get back on track. Now, let's move on to our next update. 22. Green Bay Packers. Things have taken a rough turn in Green Bay. Jordan Love's last 2 games have seen him throw 5 interceptions with an average QBR of just 10.5. The Packers have some work to do to get back on course. Now, let's move on to our next update. 23. Tennessee Titans. The Tennessee Titans need Derrick Henry to be dominant. But in their recent matchup against the Colts, he averaged just 3.3 yards per rush. Without him at his best, the Titans are struggling to find their rhythm. Now, let's move on to our next update. 24. Las Vegas Raiders. Raiders vs. Patriots is already being dubbed as a potential toilet bowl game of the week. It might not sound glamorous, but every win matters, and both teams will be fighting for a spark. Now, let's move on to our next update. 25. New York Jets. Nathaniel Hackett's revenge game brought some warmth and fuzzy feelings to many. The New York Jets are looking to build on that, and it will be exciting to see how they perform in the coming weeks. Now, let's move on to our next update. 26. Arizona Cardinals. The Arizona Cardinals are a team that's no longer settling for moral victories. Their next win might be in December, and they've got some soul-searching to do. Now, let's move on to our next update. 27. Chicago Bears. Thursday night brought some excitement for the Chicago Bears with Justin Fields and DJ Moore shining. The real question is whether this newfound energy can carry over. They've got 2 home games ahead against Minnesota and Las Vegas. Now, let's move on to our next update. 28. Minnesota Vikings. The Minnesota Vikings are lurking just outside the top 25, and while their record might not be impressive, it's worth noting that each of their losses has been by 1 score. Now, let's move on to our next update. 29. Denver Broncos. The Denver Broncos have some major decisions to make, especially regarding Russell Wilson's hefty contract. Unfortunately, the earliest they can get out from under it is after the 2026 season when the dead cap money decreases to $31.2 million. Now, let's move on to our next update. 30. New York Giants. It's been a season to forget for the New York Giants. There's not a single redeeming quality to be found, and to make matters worse, their $40 million dollar man, Daniel Jones, is dealing with a neck injury. It's a complete disaster. Now, let's move on to our next update. 31. New England Patriots. The New England Patriots have suffered back-to-back blowout losses, with a combined score of 72-3. There's not much else to say, except that they've got a lot of work to do. Now, let's move on to our next update. 32. Carolina Panthers. The Carolina Panthers find themselves at the bottom of the rankings, with a 0-5 record. Frank Reich, who's responsible for drafting Bryce Young, must be having some serious buyer's remorse. The Panthers have a long road ahead to turn things around. And that's a wrap for this week's NFL Week 6 Power Rankings. Subscribe for more thrilling NFL action, and as always, make sure to share your thoughts with us. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next week for more exciting updates.